about how some of these things are calculated. And that's really her expertise. She's at UHERO, Economic Research Organization, University of Hawaii. Oh, and I was starting to say, so I've never, before she did her PhD, and I can tell you, she doesn't just sit behind a computer and work on differential equations and math and economics. I've seen her in the field many times. She loves to go places to do stuff. Very outdoorsy, right? She's always doing running. She just got back from sabbatical in Japan for 6 months, and she's working at aquaculture. So she's got a variety of interests. So she works on invasive species. That was sort of the lead off from the PhD stuff, where she did brown true snakes in Guam, as I recall. And she spent a lot of time working on water resource economics, environmental issues. We were involved with her for 5 years with the last EPSCoR project and got funded the next one, and et cetera. So take it away, Kim.
All right, thanks, Greg. So happy Thanksgiving Eve. Thanks for still being here on campus. I was a little worried it would just be me and Craig, but so because it's Thanksgiving Eve, I'll start with a couple holiday jokes. So what do you get if you divide the circumference of a pumpkin by its diameter? This is a room of scientists, so I know you can answer this. Pumpkin pie. Good job. I wish I had one to give you. That was probably the best one. I Googled a few of them. Why was the Thanksgiving soup so expensive? They get like cornier. Because it had 24 carrots. And then the last one is probably the worst. Why can't you bring turkeys to church?
Because they're in-laws.
Foul language. Okay. I'm talking about now. So this work, actually, a few of you may have heard the first version of a couple of years ago. This was kind of a result of the first EPSCoR project we had with Craig and Henrietta and a whole bunch of people in this lab and around campus. Looking at basically how to manage a coastal aquifer when you're pumping from it, it has interactions with other resources around it. So if you want to draw down a groundwater aquifer because you need the water, you have to think about kind of the implications that the lowering resource level and the lowering head level will have on the rest of the surrounding resources. So that was kind of the research question that we started with. We worked on the first paper with Craig and Henrietta's results and others from the EPSCoR project. Hi, Gwen. Speaking of EPSCoR. But we've tried to improve some of the modeling efforts since that initial paper a couple of years ago, and so that's what I'll be presenting today. Okay, so where are we talking about? We are on the Kona Coast of the Big Island in Kiholo Bay. This is where a lion's share of the work was done for the EPSCoR project. And so, let's see. What is the species that we're talking about it's kiawe, which was intentionally introduced to Hawaii many moons ago, actually for erosion control and cattle feed. So there are actually a lot of good things about kiawe. You can make honey from it. There's a lot of other uses that people have with kiawe, but one of the major concerns is that it competes for water with the rest of us. And so as part of the EPSCoR project, Bruce Dudley and Flint Hughes were kind of the main investigators on a study looking at the consequences for both nutrients and water from the presence of kiawe in Kiholo Bay. So the tree actually is a nitrogen fixer, and so it leaves a lot of nitrogen from its litter fall wherever it is. And similar species on the mainland, like salt cedar and some others, they've observed to be both nitrogen fixing and very water intensive. So they send their tap roots very deep into the ground and remove water. And so the question in the first EPSCoR project was, how is the presence of kiawe in Kiholo Bay affecting both nitrogen and water in the area? And so they had two sites, different transects of sites above Kiholo and right at the coast. And so upland, you can see the kiawe are kind of spread out. They're not very dense. It kind of looks like a savanna environment. They're not very close together at all. But in the lowland, right at the coast, right near the water, it's very dense, and it's a really thick brush of kiawe, and there's a lot of goats in there. It's hard to walk through. And so it kind of is not very intuitive, right? Because if you think of Kona, you think, there's not very much rain anyway, but the rain that does happen is mostly Malka, right? It's not at the coast. It's actually very dry around Kiholo Bay. And so the question is, why is it so dense from kiawe? Where is that? How are they getting their water? Why are they growing so densely in that area? And so here's a picture from above of Kiholo Bay, and as you can see, so all of the green, most of the green is kiawe, and as you can see, it's most dense right along the coast, right? And then it kind of thins out as you go up. And so they were testing nitrogen and water, stem water, both Malka and Mackay. So how did they figure out, how much water and kiawe was using and where it was coming from? First thing they did was they looked at stand level transpiration, and they noticed for kiawe in the lowland it was much higher actually than the upland. So about 1,900 cubic meters per hectare per year in the lowland, and only about 189 cubic meters per hectare per year in the upland. So again, this is not very intuitive, and the question is then, where is this water coming from? And the thought that they wanted to test was, is it coming from the groundwater? Okay, so here's where I exit my comfort level, but I know that this is something that you're all familiar with, and that's stable isotopes. So what they did to test where the water was coming from for the kiawe was they looked at, let's see if I can say this right. So they tested the stem water using, is it delta 18, O18? The change in O18? I don't even know.
Delta 18 is fine. Okay,
delta O18. They looked at the isotopic signature for the stem water in the lowland, which are the dark squares, versus the upland signature, which are the empty squares, okay, which are up here. And they compared that signature over this time horizon with upland rainwater, lowland rainwater, upland groundwater, and lowland groundwater. And what they found was that the lowland stem water followed the isotopic signature best of the lowland groundwater, and the upland stem water followed the signature of the rainwater the best. And so from this, they were basically able to conclude that 90%, something like 90% of the transpiration was coming from the groundwater in the lowland. So here is an isoscape of Kiholo Bay, and so the values from the other slide for the stem water are something around -7 parts per million, or sorry, what is the units, parts per 1,000? So that's the dark blue here, and as you can see, it's mostly, again, groundwater by the coast, and that's the same isotopic signature as the lowland kiawe had. And so as those values increase, it better matches the rainwater in the upland. Okay, so something else they were able to do was calculate estimate about how much water the kiawe was actually uptaking from the area. So the very dense kiawe at Kiholo was about 50 hectares, and they estimated that groundwater was about 90% of that lowland water use. The transpiration was estimated at about 1,900 cubic meters per hectare per year, and so that comes to about 250 cubic meters per day as a result of the presence of kiawe in Kiholo. So what does that mean to, water management, the community, anyone? So if you assume people use on average about 144 gallons of water a day, which is the average, that the amount of kiawe that's currently present in Kiholo is equal to the daily water use of about 460 people. So it's kind of, is that a lot? Is that a little? I mean, kind of up to you guys to decide. But one question then is, so what, right? So what do you do? Do you deal with the kiawe? Do you leave it there? Is that not a big deal? Can we just get the water from someplace else? Are we really worried about it? And that's where economics can kind of come in and kind of help the discussion and lend some insight, hopefully. Okay, so here's how we think about basically how to manage the aquifer when you have this interaction of kiawe that's basically competing for the same resource. So basically, what changes the amount of groundwater that's underground, right? So the delta H here is the change in head level, which is basically an index of how much water is in the aquifer, right? So when head level goes up, you have more water. When it goes down, draws down, you're losing groundwater. And so how does this change over time? Well, you have natural recharge, right? So precipitation. You have a leakage out into the ocean, right? And so depending on the environment, the porosity, all of these different factors, a different amount of water, and also the head level, right? So the higher the head level, the more pressure, the more leakage, or SGD out to the coastal environment. And as the head level goes down, that leakage will go down as well. So Q is going to be our decision variable as far as how much water to pump. So that just stands for extraction. And that's a human dimension, right? So that's how basically we as managers can come in and actually change the amount of resource, right? So we choose how much to pump every year. And then we have the extra complication now of kiawe, which we really need a better picture of because that really doesn't look anything like kiawe. You get the idea. Big, thirsty roots, but we just can't see them because they're underground. So here's kind of a cartoon of that whole story. So it's raining, it's filling up this bathtub that we know isn't actually a bathtub, but the next F-score project will help tell us exactly what that looks like, right? So this is a very simplified model just so we can get the basic idea. So it rains, it fills up this tank. Some of it is going to leak out into the water. Some of it is going to be pumped up by groundwater managers for human use. And then finally, the one that we're focusing on today is the presence of kiawe and how much it's pulling up and what we should do about that. And what can we do? I mean, actually, we can affect all four of those dimensions in different ways, right? As far as recharge, we could build storage tanks and we could retain more of that rainfall so to increase the amount of recharge that's happening. We could irrigate if we wanted to with some kind of other water source, right, to increase recharge. Leakage is harder to affect directly, but there's a lot of different ways that we talk about. Watershed conservation changes the amount, potentially, the amount that we're pumping, right? So our decisions to extract groundwater is going to make the head level go up and down. That's going to change leakage. Extraction is our direct kind of control variable, right? We decide every year how much, whether we're setting different sustainable yields or, however the Water Commission or Board of Water Supply is deciding how to pump. And there's different ways we can affect that. We can set an amount like sustainable yield. We will pump this many million gallons per day. We can try to do it through pricing, so if we have higher prices, that hopefully will incentivize people to use different amounts of water. We can do it through different efficiency standards. There's a lot of different kind of demand side controls on pumping or extraction. There's also supply side things we can do, like desalinate, right, or build water recycling plants to supplement groundwater. So there's demand side and supply side ways to change our decisions about extraction. And then finally, as far as kiawe, we can leave it there and just let it take up that much water, 250 cubic meters per day, or we can get rid of all of it or some of it in order to put back some of that water, because we know that's beneficial. Okay, now how do we decide what to do? First of all, we need to know how much it's going to cost to remove kiawe. And the kind of strange thing about doing this for Hawaii is there isn't a lot of, at least studies that I know about, that have looked at, or there's not projects that have actually removed large portions of kiawe. I just found out about one, though, that I need to look into more. But basically the way we thought about the cost of kiawe removal is we looked at how they do it in other places. Not kiawe exactly, but very similar species. And as you can see from this table, there's a lot of different ways to remove it, and there's high variation in the cost of doing so. And so, of course, optimal management depends on how you do it, right? I mean, do you spend a lot of money? Do you spend a little? How often do you have to retreat? What are you going to replace it with? What are other consequences or unintended consequences of pesticides or herbicides or any of these things? And so basically we used an average in order to figure out how to do it in Hawaii, since there haven't been a lot of projects actually removing kiawe yet. Okay, so what we do is basically it's dynamic optimization. We take a 100-year time horizon, and what we're trying to do is look at optimizing or maximizing the net present value of the net benefits. And so we measure benefits as the water consumption, right? And so there's equations behind all of this, but basically, you know, how much benefit you get from using the groundwater. And then the costs, there's several different elements. And so the cost of water extraction is just based on basically how much energy it takes to pump the groundwater. So depending on how high the head level is, the cost goes up as the head level goes down. And so as you go further into the future and your demand is increasing, you have head level is going down because you're using more, which actually makes the cost go up for a couple of reasons. We expect energy prices to potentially go up in the future. So, but we're also having a more scarce resource, and so it gets more expensive to actually access the water. Economists always put kind of this backstop technology or alternative technology as an alternative to using groundwater, because I mean, we would never say the best thing to do if we're trying to maximize benefits here, you don't want to just say use all the groundwater everywhere until it's empty, right? At some point, it's going to become economic to use something else, right? It's going to be cost effective to desalinate, do water recycling, do catchment, do something besides continue to draw down every single well and aquifer around the state. And so we call it a backstop or an alternative at a certain basically price. We switch from using groundwater to desalination, and you can use any alternative technology that is kind of the most cost effective for the appropriate time. And then finally, kiawe removal, which we just talked about. We use the average of the cost from the mainland of doing that. And so the way you optimize is you choose each of these decision variables. You choose how much water to pump every year, how much to desalinate if applicable. So further in the future, say in year 70, if it becomes better to do that, we do that. And then how much kiawe to remove. And so the improvement that I was talking about earlier from the previous paper is we only looked at two cases: remove all the kiawe or remove none. keep it all there, 50 hectares, or remove it all. And we knew that that probably isn't how real managers are going to behave anyway. You're not going to just take it all out or leave it there forever. And so what we're able to do in this version is think about it in a more dynamic way. So we have actually a growth function for kiawe that changes over time, and we can actually decide every year for 100 years how much to remove, 0 or more than 0, at some cost. Okay, and the idea here is to make the benefits of water consumption the highest we can while minimizing all 3 of these other costs. And so one thing that I ran into a lot doing my graduate research and doing a lot of invasive species type of research in economics is, why would you ever not get rid of it? If it's a bad species, why would you ever, what do you mean optimize? The answer is eradicate. That was kind of the common thing I always, when I spoke with invasive species managers and natural resource managers, what do you mean there's an optimal level of Myconia? That makes no sense, but it does. If you're thinking about everything in kind of monetary terms, right? Some Myconia might be okay because the cost of getting every last tree is higher than the damages that those few trees are causing, right? And so there's all these trade-offs, and the idea of this slide is they're also intertemporal. So they're also, today's benefits versus tomorrow's benefits. So for example, we can remove kiawe today, and that's costly, but we have to compare that against the fact that if it's gone now, we're going to have less uptake in the future, right? Because kiawe is going to be gone, or there's going to be less of it, so there's going to be less water. That trade-off is not apparent unless you do the modeling, right? You do the math and you kind of understand, if I remove this many hectares, I get back this much water, and what is that worth? That's the kind of decisions that you have to make now, and thinking about it not only now, but in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. If we decide to not use water today, just because I'm maximizing the benefit from water consumption, it still might be beneficial to actually wait and not use the groundwater. And why is that? Because remember, the cost is increasing the lower the head level is, the higher the cost, right? And so if you actually have more of the resource later, it's less costly to get it, right? And so conservation today actually means you get to use it for a cheaper price later on, right? The more scarce a resource is, the more expensive, the higher the scarcity value is. And so all of these intertemporal trade-offs are really hard to kind of see at the outset without kind of thinking about everything at the same time. Okay, so when we did this modeling, what we realized is everything depends, of course. On one hand, on the other hand, economists have lots of hands. So models are only as good as the information that you put in, right? We all understand this, and there's actually a lot that's unknown in the model. For example, one of the most important things, remember what we're trying to do is maximize the net benefits from water. So how valuable water is depends on how many people are going to be needing it now and for the next 100 years, right? And so it depends on how fast demand is growing for water. If demand is growing very quickly, you have a different answer about groundwater management and kiawe management than you do if demand stays about the same every year for the next 100 years. And what is the right answer? Population is projected to grow, but not that fast. It depends on a lot of things that are going on the Kona Coast, as far as permitting and regulations, how much more development we're going to get. That's going to change the answer to this question. And so what we did is we looked at 3 different cases. One when we have constant demand, so about the same every year into the future. Another one with intermediate demand growth, so about 1% per year, and then another with kind of aggressive demand growth for water of 3% per year. And the answer is absolutely different depending on the growth of demand. The other thing that we discovered matters a lot is how expensive it is to remove the kiawe. Because remember, it's not just the 50 hectares that are there today, it's growing every year. So even if you remove it, it's coming back, and it comes back kind of quickly. And so, you know, it's not as easy as just saying, well, how expensive is it to remove today? You have to think about, okay, I take out 25 acres, and then how many acres do I have in the next period? And so that's something you have to keep track of. And so the next three graphs show basically each of these cases and how, so on the y-axis is basically the benefit in dollars. So the net present value as a function of removal cost, because basically I'm trying to show a lot of different dimensions at the same time. So the things that matter the most we found are how expensive kiawe is to remove and how fast demand is growing. So in this case, we have constant demand. We found that if demand is not growing very quickly, then the effect of kiawe is actually pretty small. And unless the cost of removing it is very low, which is, you can see there's a scale, it's actually better to just leave it. So you only remove basically if the cost of removing is less than $42 per hectare. And so the way to read this graph is, so this is basically how the benefit changes as, so your benefit goes down as it gets more expensive to remove, right? Because remember, what are we measuring? We're measuring benefits minus costs. So as costs get bigger, your net present value is going down, right? So the higher the cost, the lower the benefit. It only makes sense to remove if, so basically this remove all. This means we remove all immediately. So that will be better than removing none, only up until $42 per hectare per year. Otherwise, you get a higher benefit of removing none than removing all. Now in the intermediate case, when demand is growing by 1% per year, it depends on, and then we have even more. So now we can remove all right away. We can remove some later on, so we delay removal, and we do a little bit of removal every year, or we can just leave it all there, right? There's basically three management options: all now, none at all, or some in between. And it depends on your cost. So if it's very cheap, so down here, if removal cost is very low, then we should just remove all right away. That's going to give us the highest benefit. As the price goes up, then it's actually better to wait and remove some later. And then, however, as the price gets higher and higher, things switch around. So now, if it's really expensive to remove, then we're going to wait and not do it all. We're going to remove later, because that gives us higher benefit than removing everything. But it's always better than not doing anything until it gets very expensive. So at some point, doing no management of the invasive species is better because it's just too expensive. And that is, I don't even know what this number is, but something much higher than $105 per hectare per year. So in that case, removing none is going to be better than removing all, but removing some is always preferred after this point. And then the most aggressive demand growth, so say, there's increasing development, population growth is high, a lot of people need the water in a big way, so what that is doing essentially is it's adding a lot of value to the benefit side, and it's diminishing the cost side, right? And so basically it's always best to get rid of kiawe immediately, because that's always going to give you higher benefit, because basically you need that water. You get so much benefit from the water that kiawe is taking that you should just always remove it in the first period, and that's always preferred. And basically doing nothing is never an option if demand growth is high enough. And I think that's all I have. So again, the research was funded by EPSCOR, the first round, second round, I can't remember. I can't keep up with them all. We have a lot of different projects like this. My main focus is basically on interacting. The interacting resources is something that I've done a lot with. I look at invasive species, watershed management, and conservation, but almost exclusively focused on Hawaii, a little bit in Asia. So we have a lot on our UHERO project environment page. So, take any questions. Thanks.
Kim, who owns the land in the lowland area where the kiawe is growing?
Craig probably knows that.
It's currently owned by
Right?
Nature Conservancy.
I think nature conservation just around the
Is
ponds,
Melbourne.
otherwise DLNR.
DLNR is the coastal area that the kiawe is on.
So it's state land, not, you know. And I got a couple questions, I may as well run through them now. What else will grow there? Do we want to leave a wasteland?
That's a good question.
with
Yeah.
with erodible surfaces?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's another question is nothing better than kiawe, or is kiawe better than nothing? I don't
Right.
know, because I mean, yeah, what will come in if we do remove it?
Yeah, there's some aesthetics too.
Yeah.
Whether we like the look of kiawe or not, at least it's something green, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, how erodible is that soil even, right?
Yeah, what soil?
Right. So I mean, if we get rid of it, I don't know if anything else will. I mean, maybe grass though, mountain grass or
Native
Opposite.
poppy grows there.
poppy.
Yeah, the native poppy grows in that
Oh.
area.
Okay.
Probably something will grow.
Yeah,
I have
the
that.
goats probably really like it though.
Local residents tell me
Could-
they like it, they like walking through it, so there's an
Yeah.
aesthetic value to some.
There's definitely other, you know, benefits that are not included here at all too, that, you know, when I've given this talk other places, that's the question a lot is like, well, you know, you didn't include other, you know, charcoal use and honey and, I mean, people
Right.
do value kiawe, and there are removal projects, and the community can get upset, you know, if people just truck it away because they gather and they use it for things, so.
My other question was, are they actually entertaining the idea of doing this?
I don't know. I haven't asked them lately, but,
Why would they?
Yeah, I don't know. Save
Well-
water.
yeah, I mean, they have this whole, you know, I mean, water is a priority for DLNR, and they're always looking for ways, you know, rainfall is a forest, watershed conservation, change the landscape, plant native trees, but they have this invasive species that we know is definitely uptaking, you know, at least for about 400 people's worth of water per day. So, I mean, you know, a question that I'm really interested in is when you are trying to save water, how do you do it in the most cost-effective and efficient way? Because there's so many options, right? There's so many ways to do, you know, water recycling is getting more popular, and catchment, and kind of all of these other ideas. Watershed conservation, planting native trees, getting rid of ungulates, getting rid of invasive species. So what does that mix look like, you know? In order to maximize water at the lowest cost and potentially have other benefits too. I mean, people argue about, you know, native forest restoration is good for many reasons. I mean, water is good, but we like biodiversity too, you know, so. Whereas just building a catchment may not have other benefits necessarily, right? So.
I found that, I think the study is great, especially in highly transportable to other areas.
Yeah.
I think a particular study site probably has very limited value in my
Yeah,
mind, because
yeah.
it's basically going to be conservation land, local landowners. The fraction of water that flows through there is tremendous, so that water is not even,
Yeah.
there's one little well there.
Right.
Somebody uses it for wash water, so
Sure.
major water, there is one of the richest people on the island lives down there and can afford to desalinate
Yeah.
his own water.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you took the whole thing, if you just move it down the coast there, somewhere in Kona,
Right. frontier because that's where the data was, but it's definitely meant as a illustrative model of this is how you think about resource management when all of these things are linked.
Could I ask you to go back a few slides to, we have, anyways, yeah, so you have your net present value in
Yeah.
millions. So
Yeah.
I see here is what, is it $300,000 difference on your y-axis? So what, can you explain to us a little more about what net present value really represents?
You mean the present value part? So I
Yeah.
mean, it's a way to compare streams of benefits and costs now into the future, right? But compare it now. So
Yeah, but what are all the variables, right? So there's water.
so the variables are these. So basically the benefits are measured in water consumption. So basically price times how much is being used. So the benefit that I get from water is expressed in my willingness to pay for how many gallons that I use, right? So that's just basically price times quantity.
But for this local area, what did you use?
We use prices and quantities of water
How much is
consumed.
actually being used in
Yeah.
that area?
I mean, we estimated demand function, which, I mean,
Hmm.
it's estimated
question.
and it's, yeah, you know, elasticity, we don't know how sensitive people are to price changes and, but we used, you know, actual prices and quantities consumed in this area. Probably a little bit bigger than Kiholo itself, but West Hawaii.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering.
That's a lot bigger.
It's like 1,000.
You used all of West Hawaii?
Not for the total benefits, but for the demand function, just to get kind of an idea of the slope of how sensitive people are to price. But we used the actual dimensions of the aquifer to get how much water was available, the Kiholo aquifer. So we didn't use, I mean, we used prices from West Hawaii, and the quantity is based on the size of the aquifer. So we didn't need to know exactly how many people in Kiholo are using how much. We just need to know basically how much they pay per unit, and then we know the units from the dimensions of the aquifer. And then the cost side that we're subtracting is how much it costs to pump, how much it costs to desal, and then how much kiawe removal is. So that net benefit is what we're thinking about in every period, and then the present value of that is just adding up with a discount rate so we can compare. I mean, present value is just like if interest rate is 5% and you know next year I can get $105, then today I would need $100, right, to be willing to accept either 100 today or 105 tomorrow. It's just a way of comparing the same value in a different time period, right? So, I mean, the reason we have to do that is because of the dynamics of the problem, because the kiawe is growing every year. We're removing water, which is changing the amount of the resource, which is changing the value of the resource. And so it's not correct to just think about what's the value of these things over time today without taking into account that they change every year and they're interacting.
What's the population of people, remember?
In Kiholo,
Yeah, I mean, so if you go back, I'm thinking, I was trying to put it in reality here. We had 300.
well, yeah, I mean, we're using the users of Kiholo Bay.
Hmm.
Basically,
What's
we're,
that, 10 people?
I mean, they move the water around. It's not just the people that live on top of it.
In
I'm
fact,
trying to
the whole
build the
aquifer is maybe
expertise,
like
yeah.
2,000 people. There's just that subdivision in Hulu, and like the resorts, I don't think you count them as permanent residents. And they're served by, I think there's only really about 3 production wells in the kind of portion of that aquifer that is actually connected to Kiholo Bay. Like the way the aquifer is drawn is not really representative of the way water flows in the area.
So you're saying it includes resorts?
Okay.
Well, I'm saying that those resorts aren't really part of the same aquifer that feeds Kiholo Bay anyways. There's There's the Big Island Country Club, which is an irrigation well. There's Pu'ulani, which serves the subdivision, and Pu'uwala, which serves the ranch. And those are really the only pumping wells other than the dust control well that's at the landfill. Those rift zone wells are in their own system pretty much.
I mean, so the value of the water is, it actually doesn't in this case depend on population. It depends on how much water is there, which depends on our assumptions about the dimensions of the aquifer. Because all we care about is how much you can charge for the water and how much there is. And then our question is how we use it over time. We don't really care who's using it. Kona can be using it, Kahala can be using it. I mean, if we build in basically distribution costs into our model, then it doesn't matter what the population is, because we want to know how to use the resource. I think Joe had a question. Yeah.
I was just curious about how real are those prices for removal? Because all that studies done on the mainland where there's probably growing in soil as opposed to growing in lava rock.
You're right.
And so the reality of actually pulling the tap roots, they don't regrow. Is that even feasible?
Not to mention the hauling costs from out there.
I really think that it's actually a resource, the kiawe, because like you mentioned, the charcoal, that stuff sells for $8 a bag at Lawns. So if they're going off a bid, I want to bid on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to actually do any kind of removal, it's going to take some kind of partnership with people that want it and, public, private, to get rid of it. Because, and you're right. I don't know that we can do the same kind of removal in the lava as they do in Texas with salt cedar.
Yeah, I work with some people who do environmental restoration up in the Ko'olas, and what they do is, like, if they find an invasive plant like Myconia or something, they chop it down and they just paint a little bit of Roundup or something on the thing, and that kills it. So you could say you can chainsaw and do whatever you want with the wood, but you got to paint this stuff on it.
Right. Actually, I just remembered the kiawe removal cost was at Kona Coast, right? Yeah, that's.
So coastal kiawe in West Hawaii is often like co-located with very important archaeological sites. So like bulldozing, not an option. So like you actually end up sort of in ridiculously expensive, even like helicopter removal of logging, which is just truly astronomical in cost.
Right.
You're probably ending up removing kiawe for other reasons than water protection necessarily, or just only for water protection, sort of on a practical level. Can you help me understand, does the model assume there's an unlimited amount of kiawe to remove?
No. So it starts with a certain amount, this 50 hectares, and it assumes a logistic growth function. So
if you can go to your graph, because I was confused, but the value of the 50 hectares is 259 million in that one?
No, so this is the net present value, this is the economic benefit. So this is basically, if we remove everything, this is benefits minus the cost of removal of using all of the water over 100 years is the present value. So 259 million over 100 years from using the water in an optimal way minus costs of desal, kiawe.
The additional water that you get from kiawe.
Yeah, and just the water that I'm managing, that I'm pumping, right? So the benefit is it's just from using the groundwater itself, nothing to do with kiawe, just ignore kiawe. Like we've done a lot of this modeling without kiawe at all. We just say, how do you use, it's just resource economics. If we have this much water, how do we use it over 100 years to get the most benefit? It depends on who's using it, what the price is, all these things, right? So we always are interested in how to use water over time, but we have this complication now that this thing is also subtracting from here. So now if we want to, basically get that water back, we have to pay for it. And so now we subtract the cost of all of these things, of pumping, desal, and then also removing. So this cost is net of the, it's mostly to be honest, because the kiawe is actually kind of a small issue.
Yeah, like
Right.
sustainable yield is
It's-
18 million gallons
Right.
in Kiholo, and
Yeah.
this is like 0.06
Right.
mgd.
Yeah, I mean, the take-home message is, I mean, actually, kiawe is not a, because, I mean, even if you look at the changes in present value, they're just not that big, even if you leave it, right?
Okay.
But that makes the story so much less exciting, so.
Sorry.
Thanks.
I was wondering if there is data on this fact that kiawe doesn't only affect the water cycle by evapotranspiration, but plants usually help recharge. And I know you have done something on recharge also on the Big Island, right? It's the
Right.
benefit of recharge.
Yeah,
But this model does not assume that kiawe helps at all with recharge.
Right.
I understand that there is very little rain
yeah,
at this
Right.
site,
yeah,
but when you're transforming this to another site, perhaps that's
I
another
see.
aspect you would have to consider.
I see, yeah, and we could, cause right now, like in this picture, right, we just take this as constant, which is not right either, because climate change, this should probably be going down, which is another issue. I mean, all of these things, I mean, we can affect them all, but, you know, how you include it for simplicity, and right here, right now, we just take it as given and as a constant. But, yeah, I see what you mean, it could also affect recharge.
Can I see your transpiration map
Yeah.
again?
This one?
No, the
This one?
the colored one, the map.
Oh, no, I just escaped,
Yeah.
I just
Cool.
went for
Are you able to see a difference where that estate is? Because I know they've cleared a lot of the kiawe and they have other things, but then they're also irrigating.
it. Is it in the middle?
It's
Where
towards
there's no
the
dark window?
north, right? Sorry, so side
Here?
interest, my family does the landscaping
Oh.
at that estate, so
Oh, huh.
it's kind of personal interest,
Uh-huh.
but
So they've cleared kiawe.
they've cleared quite a bit of kiawe compared to the surrounding area.
How did they get rid of it?
Well, I mean, the house was built and stuff, but there's still, like, even for that guy, and he is one of the richest guys on the island, they've left quite a few kiawes in, and
It's just hard to deal with, right?
yeah, it's hard to deal with. It's the only trees that were there, and
Yeah.
I mean, literally, they pay at least one guy all week to just go around and pick up kiawe beans. So the regrowth of them is quite, like,
Wow.
substantial. Like, there's
Wow.
unlimited kiawe beans,
Huh.
and each one of those will sprout, you know,
Huh.
20
Yeah.
little trees.
Yeah. Well.
So-
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, I was just
Right.
wondering if you'd be able to, like, if it would be obvious on here, because I know he does a lot of, like, pumping and then irrigation, but the plants should be different, so you
Right.
might be able to see
This is
it.
actually a signature measured in the kiawe.
Delta 18.
Oh, this
So
is
every-
only
Every
kiawe.
dot represents a measurement in the tree.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I thought it was, like, all plants. Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
But they know you guys, the kiawe people.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
you guys have been in their property.
Hey. Yeah.
I guess maybe that would be for the next call to do any ideas how to, I think we talked about this before, how to include more site-specific hydrology to this. There is obviously some
Right.
interaction between different processes.
Right. I guess what would be the thing that you think we need to improve the most? I mean, about the hydrology. I mean, right now it's a tank, so a lot can be improved. But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know where to begin, because it kind of makes things complicated the more interactions and. But I mean, how would you improve the hydrology
I think
for
I
this
can-
area in
I
particular?
can improve the hydrology, but I don't know how to link it to the economics.
Because everything should be spatial, right? And
Right.
kind of depending, rather than one well affecting the head in the same way, it depends where you pump and it changes in different ways. So that's
Leakage would get recharge.
in different ways.
Basically extraction as well.
Yeah, so that's I mean, that's where I run into just, you know, keeping track of the values of everything when you're doing it dynamically, and all of these things are linked. If you also add space, I know it can be done, I just personally don't know how to do that, you know, because I mean, what links everything is just one variable in its head.
Right.
And everything is based on that, the cost, the price, the volume. And so when you have, I mean, basically you would have many different head levels, I think, that would, and so you would have, it just expands the dimensions in a way that I can't quite get my head around. But I mean, with programming, I'm sure it can be done by someone else.
I was gonna ask, go ahead.
I guess we can like use numerical modeling to give you a snapshot at a certain time. And maybe
Okay.
you can do the
I see.
economics part, but that's not stuff. But
Yeah.
still could be spatially variable.
I
That's
see what
maybe
you
is a
mean.
difficult part.
Yeah.
For example, for sea level rise,
Mm-hmm.
the groundwater level will be higher, so more of the acreage of the kiawe roots will reach
Yeah.
higher number of trees will reach the aquifer
I see. Right.
in the future. But maybe the coastal ones will die off if it gets too salty. I don't know how much salt they can tolerate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the problem too with thinking 100 years away, is there's gonna be a lot that's different that we're not accounting for. Yeah.
So one of the cost drivers that you were mentioning was that the kiawe lowers the groundwater head, and it costs more to pump
Right.
water from a lower elevation. But
Yeah.
with that 460 people's worth of water
Yeah.
that's being taken out, how much does that really lower the groundwater heads in the area, or what's your assumed delta H there?
It's not very much. I mean, because there's just so much water there. That's why the value doesn't change very much, even over 100 years. It's, you know, 200,000, I think. In the constant demand case, even over 100 years, remove all versus remove none, it's $200,000. So.
Or I guess I just mean, like, what's the physical drawdown, like, in head? Like, the amount of head is zero would be
It's really
pretty
small.
low.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
off the
okay.
top of my head, but.
So what's your next, if you had your choice of any place to work, you know, forget about kiawe for a minute, start thinking big economic crops, et cetera, that make a big difference in Hawaii. You could go anywhere, say you had some magical grant, had $20 million in it. Where would you want to go next? What would you do?
Well, I mentioned before, I think, not really about crops, but I'm interested in how to do water conservation. And I have a couple of projects that have kind of been building on each other. So one looked at, and it was funded by Hawaii Community Foundation, at a couple of sites on the Big Island as well, in Ka'u and Kona Coast. And basically return on conservation investment. So if you spend some money removing pigs and goats and building fences, which are really expensive, and you know, you get rid of the invasive species and you plant natives, how much water do you get back? And what's, you know, how long does it take you essentially to pay off the investment of, you know, millions of dollars in fences that have to be replaced every 10 years because the environment is so wet and it's so, you know, and does it really pay? I mean, does water as an investment, water conservation really pay in a wet place? I mean, you know, and what are the other benefits? And so we have a follow-on grant to that was looking at not only water benefits, but can we measure all of the other benefits? So biodiversity and, you know, endangered species, plants, birds, and how do those returns to conservation investment change in different places? So I mean, I think if I could do anything in Hawaii, I think that question really depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Right? And it would be, I think, really interesting to understand what is it about different places that gives you higher returns or lower, and how do you change how you do conservation activities or, you know, whatever, catchment or all these things depending on where you are. So to kind of, because I mean, I think a lot of initiatives in the state, you know, with Water Commission and Board of Water Supply, and they're always trying to think about engineering and how do we do this better and water recycling, and it depends on so many factors. And so understanding why you get water across different landscapes in kind of the most cost-effective way is, I think, a really fruitful area that can be used in, you know, anywhere, but it just hasn't been done here. And I haven't really seen it done anywhere else, like explaining why and why the landscape matters, so.
Anybody else?
Yeah, maybe one more. Can you include like water quality issues like salinity, for example, right? This is affected by.
Yeah, I mean, one way we do it just very kind of roughly is there's a minimum head level that you can't pump below because then it gets too salty. So I mean, you can do it, I think, in different parts of the equation, but probably mostly related to how much you would pump. You can't, you know, you can't go too far or pump too much because you'll get water quality issues, so you can build it in a constraint that way. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, thank you, Kim.